Good evening. I'm Mark Updegrove, Director of the LBJ Library, and on behalf of HBO Documentary Films, the Austin Film Festival, and the Texas Observer, I want to welcome you here tonight. To our friends at the LBJ Library, welcome back. This is our first program after the summer hiatus, and we have a lot of great programming in store for you this year. To those of you from HBO and the Austin Film Festival and the Texas Observer, we're glad to have you with us tonight. And I hope you'll consider joining our friends' program. Throughout the course of this year, we'll have Leslie Stahl and Morley Safer from 60 Minutes. We'll have the U.S. Ambassador to Mexico. And we'll have former U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor joining us, among others. So I hope if you're interested in joining this program, you'll take the literature on the tables outside of the auditorium or see the information on our website, lbjlibrary.org. The Kennedy and Johnson families have contributed much to this country's history and indeed have forged a rich, proud history together. And tonight we're delighted to welcome Rory Kennedy to the LBJ Library for the first time as she shares her documentary film, The Fence, about the fence that runs along the U.S.-Mexican border. It's particularly topical as debates ensue across this country about immigration reform. And it's also a topic that will be of great interest to President Johnson, who 45 years ago introduced the Immigration Act of 1965, which, to my mind, changed fundamentally the fabric of this country and forever allowed us to realize the great promise of America. We're also pleased to have the film's producer, Keven McAlester, and our old friend, author and historian, Doug Brinkley, with us, who will join Rory after the film for a discussion about the film. But before we get started, there are just a couple of people that I'd like to recognize in the audience. First is Consul General of Mexico, Ambassador Rosalba Ojeda. Is she here? Welcome. And President and Mrs. Johnson's granddaughter, Catherine Robb. And finally, it's my great pleasure to introduce Barbara Morgan, the executive director of one of the founders of the Austin Film Festival, who will in turn introduce Rory Kennedy. Barbara?
Hello, everyone. Welcome again. We really hope you will enjoy this evening's program. As Mark said, I'm the executive director of the Austin Film Festival, and in case you're unaware, we are coming up. So we hope you will check out our website at austinfilmfestival.com for some of the other programming that we're going to be doing throughout the festival, October 21st through the 28th. This is a particularly exciting evening for us because we are able to present something before our event that would actually have a resonance in our own community. Mary Margaret Farabee, who's out here somewhere, called me in January and said, we have to have this event. And HBO, who has been a wonderful partner, was kind enough to put this all together for us. So we have really enjoyed working with the LBJ staff and Mark Updegrove. Want to thank them again. Want to also encourage you to stay for the Q&A afterwards. Mark has talked about all the people that are going to be speaking, and it really should be a lively discussion. So, and now I want to actually introduce you to Rory Kennedy, who is the film's director. She's a particularly accomplished filmmaker, documentary maker, has brought us such films as The Ghost of Abu Ghraib, The Execution of Wanda Jean, and one of my favorites, American Hollow. So please welcome Rory Kennedy.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a great honor for me to be here tonight at the LBJ Library and Museum to premiere The Fence. I wanted to start by just thanking a few people who have made this evening possible. Mark Updegrove, who you just heard from, who is the director of the LBJ Library. really appreciate all of his hard work and for hosting us this evening. Barbara Morgan as well, who's the director of the Austin Film Festival. Mike Hopper and Curry King are here representing HBO, and they all worked very hard to make this evening possible, so I want to thank them for all of their efforts, and it's just so great to be here tonight for me. I wanted to tell you very briefly about how I came to make this film. About a year and a half ago, I got a call from my friend Douglas Brinkley, who's going to be here later this evening, moderating the discussion. He's a historian writer who was then a visiting professor at the University of Texas in Brownsville, and he called to talk to me about the fence. I knew about the fence, but he helped fill in some of the details. He told me about how they were proposing to put the fence right through the middle of his campus, so that part of it would double as the home run fence in the baseball field, and another part was going to require students to actually use a passport to get from one end of the campus to the other. And none of it was actually on the U.S. border, which is the Rio Grande River. It was hundreds of yards north of the border, creating this kind of no man's zone. So, you know, everything he told me, the more I heard from him, the more absurd it sounded. So I got off the phone and I started doing my own research and found that the more I learned, the more absurd it got, except, of course, it got more tragic, too, with the knowledge of the increase in the number of people who are dying now trying to cross the border as a result of the fence. I felt like the topic touched on a number of issues that I'm very passionate about, issues around immigration, the drug war, the war on terror, and also the importance of holding our legislators and policymakers accountable for how they're spending our money. So it's now a year and a half later, and at $3.7 billion, the fence is completed, as is my film, although for a lot less money. And I look forward to sharing it with you tonight. Before doing so, I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank some of the people who made the film possible and who worked on it. I had a really wonderful team. I first want to thank Sheila Nevins and Nancy Abraham at HBO. I've made a number of documentaries now with HBO, and they're terrific partners and always wonderful to work with, and I think they always helped to make my films better, and they supported this from the very beginning, and so I want to thank them for all that they've done. And I want to thank some of the team that worked tirelessly to actually create the film. Namely, I really want to thank Keven McAlester, who is here tonight. He was the producer on the project with me, and he was really my partner in making this film. He was out in the field with me. He was in the edit room. He was with me every step of the way, and I really couldn't have done it without him. He has a terrific talent and great humor, and was a terrific partner. And there were many other people who worked really hard. I'm not going to go into all their names, but I do so appreciate the team that we had working with us on this film. And lastly, I want to thank all of you for coming this evening. I'm really excited to share this film with you, and I look forward to our discussion afterwards. And thank you again.
I was sitting next to my son, Charlie, who's 10 years old, on one side, and Rory Kennedy on the other side during the film. And at the very end of the film, my son turned to Rory Kennedy and said, "That was awesome." It was awesome, and I know we're anxious to hear from the filmmakers. Just one bit of housekeeping before our discussion begins, and that is, if you wouldn't mind exiting through the back doors there, we would be most grateful. Now it's my pleasure to introduce back to the stage the director, Rory Kennedy, the producer, Keven McAlester, and our moderator, Doug Brinkley. Nice job.
Testing. Well, good evening, and it's wonderful to be here. And thank you, Mark, for hosting such a great event, and thank you, HBO, for having such a wonderful audience here. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to try to have Keven and Rory get into a conversation. I'll have some questions, have a bit of a dialogue, and then hopefully open it up to the audience. So if you have some questions about this, I think very significant topic about the border fence. Rory, in her opening remarks, had mentioned I had gotten very engaged with it. It was just, came out of an odd way for my interest in the fence, was just that I had edited Ronald Reagan's diaries and was doing coverage on the end of the Cold War, and Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall, becoming this soundbite. And it seemed so odd that the whole country was celebrating tearing down of the wall in Berlin and in front of presidential libraries. There's a hunk of the Berlin Wall at the Baker Institute at Rice University, hunk of the Berlin Wall, but yet here in Texas and in Arizona, California, New Mexico, people are talking about putting up a wall, putting up a fence. And I don't think at the very end, that last credit was astounding to just see how much money goes into this effort, how much of you guys are paying for this fence. And I wanted to begin to ask Rory, if I could first, what surprised you, Rory, about a project like this? Because you've traveled all over the world doing documentaries. What about going to the Mexican-American border that really took you aback out of the gate?
Well, I would say that I had never been to that part of the United States, and I was, first of all, blown away by how beautiful it was, and then, of course, how absolutely ugly this fence was, kind of in the middle of this very pristine area of the United States, one of the most beautiful parts of the United States in my mind. One of the things that surprised me in spending time on the border is I assumed that the people who were most in greatest support of the fence were going to be people who are on the border, who really are on the front lines of these issues that we address in the film, the issues around immigration, people coming over the border, the numbers of people coming over the border, drugs coming over the border, and of course the fear of terrorists coming over the border. They're on the front line, so of course I assumed they were going to be and had been the people who were in the greatest support of the fence. But what I found, in fact, was that people who were on the border saw firsthand how ineffective the fence was. And, you know, the John Ladds and the Bill Odles of the world, who were the two farm owners, I think were very indicative of kind of the larger population there, where they were seeing the same numbers of people coming across. They were seeing how intrusive it was to the environment. Many of the people on the border, and you know this, have a very friendly relationship with the South, and many of them share families, communities, businesses. There was a very friendly relationship, and now, of course, we put this fence in the middle of this, which has been very disruptive. And I think also, you know, even talking to the Minutemen and many members of Homeland Security and Border Patrol, so you're very hard-pressed at this point to find anyone, you know, maybe with the exception of John McCain during the campaign cycle, who's really supportive of this fence, who thinks this is a great idea and has been enormously effective, and, you know, really can articulate how wonderful it is at this point, given the documentation of how ineffective it's been.
Why are there so many gaps? Like, why do you build a fence, and then you have that footage you took within that opening? Why is that? I mean, what's going on?
Nobody knows.
Nobody.
It's. I mean, I think it's ill-conceived, you know, to build a 670-mile fence on a 2,000-mile border, and it's true. People just, you know, when they're not going over it or under it, they're walking around it, and so, you know, on that level, I felt that it was important for this film to really hold our legislators accountable, especially given where we are financially as a country. You know, every dollar should count, and how they're spending it and how they're using it. And I think to, you know, build something that's perhaps for political purposes as opposed to, what is really effective policy, I feel like in this day and age is really irresponsible. And so, in addition to the issues that I think the film addresses and the fence addresses around immigration and the drug war and the war on terror, we felt that it was important to also look at our legislators and policymakers and hold them to account on both sides of the aisle.
I'm going to bring Keven in a minute, but Rory's, I wanted to ask her a personal question that I'm curious about. I don't know the answer. I saw footage online recently of your mother going down with Cesar Chavez in the 60s. And of course, Chavez was so involved with the whole 1960s. And Bobby Kennedy, your father, famously fasted with Cesar Chavez, and then later your mother has this connection with Dolores Huerta and Chavez. Did that influence your thinking at all? Like, did it make you think about your family's connection to Latino culture and the whole Chavez legacy and fighting for the works of migrant workers that your family's been so deeply associated with?
Well, for me, I've been making documentaries now for about 20 years, and whenever, I take on a particular subject matter, it takes a year or maybe even more out of your life really focusing on one area, and so I, choose my topics with a lot of thought and consideration. And one of the reasons that this issue spoke to me is because I feel very passionate about issues around immigration. It's certainly a hot button issue right now, and I think that it deserves the consideration and thoughtfulness that reflects the reality of how complicated the situation is. I also, we hear over and over that we're a nation of immigrants, but of course, when you reflect back on that, that's so very true that really the only people who are not immigrants in this country are Native Americans. Otherwise, everybody who doesn't have Native American blood come from immigrants. We were a country up into the late 1800s that didn't have any policies restricting people coming into this country. And you look back on our history and on the 100 years ago, I think there's generally opposition to whatever group, the largest group of immigrants who are coming in. And so 100 years ago was the Irish. And, in Boston, there was no Irish need apply. And then 50 years later, 70 years later, my uncle becomes president. And, I have confidence that in 50 years from now, there's going to be presidents who are coming across the border now, descendants of the folks who are coming across the border. You look at the great immigrants in our history, Albert Einstein, so many people, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Madeleine Albright. These are all immigrants who you might not agree with politically or have differences of, but they contribute to our culture and to who we are. And so to me, these issues are enormously important and define who we are as a people. When we decide as a country we're going to put up this fence, I want people to be aware of it. I want us to take responsibility for the effects of it and to voice their opinion as to whether this is really who we are, who we want to be. Is this a wall? Is this a fence coming out of fear? Or is this a fence that really addresses the issues at hand? To me, the answer is clearly no. We aren't a nation that builds fences and walls. But, I want to get the information out there to people so that they can be informed and know what's happening.
Well, working with HBO, you certainly are able to get the word out. And I was last night watching a program on HBO, and already they're starting to advertise The Fence. And Rory's going to be going, and Keven, I think, too, to San Diego and other cities where already this documentary is becoming very kinetic in this fall season. I wanted to ask you, how do you go about, Keven, making a documentary like that? I know some people here that are interested in filmmaking, but how do you tackle a big topic like this when CNN and Fox and other people are doing border reports? What resources do you bring in, and what mindset do you bring in to make a film like this?
I think our tactic was to focus on the people who lived around the fence and the reality of their lives. and to sort of take it from both angles. We spent a lot of time with the Minutemen, a lot of time with the Coyotes on the other side of the border. So it would feel more like a portrait of what it was like to live around the fence rather than a sort of dry expositional piece about the fence itself.
I think we also struggled a bit because, you know, the fence deals with so many complex issues, the drug war and immigration, to really keep the focus on the fence. And how the fence was affecting people's lives, how it was changing people's lives, how it was affecting the environment, and to kind of maintain that focus.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, it's clearly just a monument to our lack of immigration policy and a failed drug war. You know, so I think that sort of was the through line that kept us going.
Did you find the whole fence just absurd? Was there like a catch-22 Joseph Heller or Kurt Vonnegut or almost Terry Southern or somebody who could write about it, because it seems nonsensical at its core? It's becoming more of a symbol than a useful piece of policy. Is that correct?
I completely agree. And you know, when Rory and I first started talking about working on this, other than the opportunity to work with her, like that was, I think, what drew me in, was the complete ridiculousness of this insane boondoggle. So yes.
And I think, you know, when I'm approaching a different, you know, a documentary, I try to kind of do my own research and figure out what I think is the sort of closest thing to my truth of the experience that I have in the research I've done. And what I found myself saying over and over again, you know, whether it was based on the 670 miles on the 2000 border, or the proposal to put the fence through the middle of the campus, which I talked about, you know, people driving over and going under it. Just again and again, I kept saying, this is so absurd, this is so crazy. And, you know, I haven't sort of incorporated humor, or sort of the dark humor that comes out in this film and in many of my other films, but I felt like it was this kind of, we felt that there was this catch-22. In fact, we read that book in the making of the film. You, I think, reread it, but to try to capture the absurdity of it was, I think, kind of foremost on our agenda. And it seemed like using humor a bit, even with the dark elements of it, seemed important as an approach.
Or did you find any skepticism going down there? Here, you know, your HBO, Rory Kennedy, you're going down talking to Minutemen and going down along the border. Did you feel people were eager to tell the story of the border, or was there suspicion that this is sort of, you know, liberals coming to make fun of us?
Well, in Mexico, you'd be surprised what people will tell you if you tell them that you're making a film about something dumb that the United States government did. The Minutemen were a slightly tougher task, but they too want equal time, and so after spending a night alone in the dark with one of them, they agreed to do it.
I won't ask a follow-up about that. I don't want to know.
He was armed and I was not. It was a horrible situation.
Was there when you see those tunnels and all those innovative ways of getting into the United States, was it a frightening scenario around the border to see tunnels like that, or the garbage there? And, you know, I was thinking, would I have the courage to even go in one of those tunnels, particularly at night, worrying about rats, dysentery, et cetera? Was there a fear factor in making a film like this, plus the violence? I mean, were you ever feel endangered?
I think sitting in a basement at Tijuana where they sold marijuana and just a sort of string of human smugglers coming in and out was pretty scary. But really, the night with the Minuteman was... It was weird because it was simultaneously the most boring night of my life and the one I was closest to dying. Like, at any moment, I could have died or fallen asleep.
What about the wildlife along the border? And you have, you know, that the fence stopping what's a natural wildlife corridor. I mean, wildlife doesn't know a border, and it's causing some havoc. Has there ever been any serious ideas that people have of wildlife refuges instead of a fence, that an agreement between Mexico and the United States of national wildlife refuges? But, Canada and the United States kind of does a shared one up in the Arctic refuge. Can Mexico and the United States create that zone, the border zone, as a wildlife refuge? Or are you finding areas that's possible, like a jaguar reserve or something like that?
Well, they created the Rio Grande, as Rory mentioned in the film, the Rio Grande National Wildlife Refuge, which is mostly, obviously, on the Texas side. But I think now, with all the sort of drug violence along the border, it's a little bit sort of politically difficult to achieve that. So I think it's possible, and I think there are probably places, further, like in Big Bend, for example. I mean, that extends on both sides of the border. So I think unofficially, yes, but at the moment, I'm not seeing it happening.
Rory, you know politics. You've come from a political family and a great public servant. Some of our nation's finest public servants have come from your family. What is the politics of Arizona right now? What's going on? Does it anger you? Are you concerned about the Mexicans coming into America and being scapegoated as terrorists and aliens? It's very powerful commentary that we haven't had terrorist attacks coming over the border, but I'm not sure the general public, if they don't see your film, knows that. There's a feeling that the border is nothing but terrorists coming in. And what with the politics of Arizona, you've alluded to it, but maybe a little more specific. What's going on in this election cycle down there?
Well, I do find it deeply concerning, and I do think that the Arizona response, as well as the fence, are indicative of the larger issue, which is a lack of a comprehensive immigration policy on the federal level in the United States right now. And I think until the federal government really addresses this issue and addresses it in a considered manner, thoughtfully, and dealing with the complexities of it, that we're going to continue to have these kind of reactionary responses that don't really lead to effective policy, and don't deal with the issues at hand in any comprehensive way. And so, I hope that it is a red flag to our leaders in Washington, that they really need to address this issue. This is a federal issue. I don't think it should be a state-by-state response. I think that the side effects from those types of reactions are going to be very dangerous and very damaging to our country. And it's imperative that we start addressing these issues right now in a comprehensive manner.
I'll ask you both this question. Should the Obama administration start saying, should we leave the wall? What should we do? Where do we go from here? This happened. There it is. We've watched the film. Should the Obama administration call a timeout on any further building of the fence? Is it too politically radioactive to even mention that? Should we complete it so at least there are not gaps in it? What do you think, Kevin?
Well, I think that they've done the sensible thing, which is they sort of immediately stopped further fence building. They took away the funding for the virtual fence, which was this $700 million Boeing project that was a complete failure. And then in this recent border security bill, which they put out there to sort of use as a kind of indication that they were starting to become tough on border security, it was mostly putting people on the border, and it actually took funding away from the fence. So they've slowly replaced the bad ideas with the good ones, in my opinion.
But just to be clear, the concept in the Secure Fence Act was always to build a 670-mile fence on the 2,000-mile border. So it wasn't that the Obama administration came in and said, okay, well, let's stop it and not build the next 1,300 miles. It was never conceived of as a 2,000-mile fence.
Is it possible that a film like yours, maybe I'm just guessing, the Obama administration might say, good, it shows the previous administration's sort of failed policy. It's a failed Bush policy that didn't work. Are you getting any indication from Homeland Security today what they feel about your film? Have you been able to get in, have you heard from anybody in government about this, or has it been quiet thus far?
We did get a call from Homeland Security, and we shared the film with them very early on during actually the rough cut phase, because we wanted to make sure that they didn't feel like there were any factual inaccuracies in the film, and they signed off on the film, and they seemed very happy with the film, which was surprising to me, but they were very positive to me on the phone about it.
I was just going to add one anecdote, which was that when we arrived at the Border Patrol in San Diego, Rory started firing these questions at one of the Border Patrol guys, and very quickly about 10 showed up and started using the word ambush. So I think they were a little put on, but only briefly.
How did you get? I thought one of the most fascinating parts of the film I enjoyed seeing is the design, the architectural design, that people were trying to build this, firewall between the United States and Mexico. How do you go about getting those designs for the fence? Are they online? Do you have to go to an archive?
I think they're online. I think it's part of the open government thing. You can just get them.
Very good. I'm going to ask one last question to each, and then I'll open this up to the audience. And Rory, I wanted to what is it people here in Texas? In particular, we're at a state university or at a presidential library. What can people do that is constructive towards this issue of immigration and the border? And as a follow-up, it almost seems like the border's its own country. Like, it doesn't seem like, it's almost like a zone. Like there used to be the Panama Canal zone. It's like the border zone. And if you wouldn't mind just touching on both, what can we do positively to improve border relations? And what's the border mean to you?
Well, I think that, obviously to me this fence doesn't, it represents ineffective policy in every facet, and is a boondoggle at its best. And so I think the fence should be, should no longer be supported, and ultimately I think we should take it down, because I think it's a terrible symbol, and it sends a horrible message to our very friendly neighbors, Mexico and the rest of Central and South America. Thank you. And I think, we have to really deal with immigration reform. There are an estimated 11 to 20 million undocumented people here in the United States right now. 500,000 people come to this country every year. The majority of people who come into this country come in legally, and then they stay past their legal dates. I think we need to have a policy that incentivizes, that provides a path to citizenship for the people who are here. There was a study that Pew Charitable Trust did that showed that people aren't, even with the economy going down, there's now been a bit of a dip of people coming into this country because of the economy, but nobody's leaving. The people who are here to stay. I think we have to deal with that reality and not pretend that people are just going to go, or that we can arrest them all, or kick them all out of the country. So I think we need to have a path of citizenship for the people who are here, and then I think we need to incentivize people who are coming here to document themselves and to have a policy that's going to address their needs and the reality. When you go, and I think you see in the film the picture between Tijuana and San Diego, and on the one side of the border you have these beautiful high-rises, gorgeous cars, beautiful sea, and on the other hand you have, on the other side of the border you have these shanties, people who are really struggling. And in being at the border fence there, they sort of struck by this reality that there's no way we're going to stop all these folks from coming into this country when there's great opportunities here, and there's so few opportunities there, and people are going to try to improve the lives of themselves and their family. And, you know, I think the film captures the kind of absurdity of the Minutemen who are, you know, have guns and are fully loaded, and then they come across these, you know, backpacks of kids and children and women who are coming here to improve their lives. I think we have to recognize that that's the reality, that it's not criminals coming into this country, it's not people who are coming to take things away, it's people who are coming to give back, who want to contribute, and that we rely as an economy on those groups of people coming over here. So I think until we start to deal with that in a comprehensive way, we're not going to really address the issues at hand.
Go ahead.
I completely agree.
Neither of you mentioned the border as a kind of a feel. I'm not sure where in Texas exactly you would say where the border begins, but it's you hit a certain area and you start feeling it in the landscape almost. But either of you want to comment on that? You spent quite a bit of time around that whole area. What is the border to you?
Well, you know, I think it's as I said, it's one of the most beautiful parts of this country. I think, you know, one of the things that struck me in being down there is talking to people is that it is really the sense that it's a different country, that it's its own reality, that the economy is a separate entity. Their economy, you know, you kind of look at the border area, and what's happening in the rest of the United States isn't happening in the border area. They're not connected in the same way. I think you see a lot of, you know, families who are going from one side of the border to the other. You see businesses crossing each other, and then, you know, this fence is really a barrier in all of that, and is destructive and obstructing what is the natural flow of energy going back and forth. And so, to me, it's a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, you know, one of the things when you go down to the border, you realize what a sophisticated culture it is. Sometimes when you say the border, it seems like this cold line in the sand and a militarized zone. But if you just spend time in Brownsville, for example, it's just the border cafes, and people are bilingual. Everybody's bilingual along the border, and it's in many ways it has a very sophisticated international culture down there that sometimes I think gets missed in some of the politics as it's presented in public media sphere. Well, let's open it up to some questions.
Thank you for coming. Who had the foresight to protest the construction? And has there any reported cases of the terrorism or cartels attacking the fence?
I don't think there's... the cartels are so well funded and so sophisticated that I don't think the fence is even on their radar, to be honest. I mean, I think it's naive to even think that a 600-mile fence along what is mostly desert is going to be their first choice of places to cross the border. So I think it's mostly small-time drug dealers that are getting arrested, and I don't think it's really had any effect on them at all, especially the submarines that they found that they go, and the really sophisticated tunnels that they go under the border, fence or not. So I would say no.
Yes, sir.
Quick question. When will this be broadcast, and will it be available on HBO online?
Did somebody pay you to ask that question? That's an excellent question. Thank you. It's going to be broadcast on September 16th at 8 p.m. on HBO, and it's going to have subsequent screenings after that. I think it will also be on demand. And I assume that there will be a DVD available probably 4 to 6 months after that. So if you enjoyed watching it tonight, I hope that you'll encourage people to watch it on September 16th. Thank you for asking.
Yes, sir, over here.
Yes, thank you. I thought the film was very well done, but I think it really only proved one side of the story. I know that other parts were introduced, and I appreciate that. But it's just on, I don't think we'd all agree that the fence was probably a bad idea and a waste of money, and to keep it up would be as such. But it's almost unbelievable that we'd advocate total open border with Mexico, with the crime, with the drugs, with all the problems that it's presenting. It's just beyond my comprehension at all that it seems to be that you're advocating a total open border between us and Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I don't know where in the film it's advocating for total open borders. I think the film is really focused on the fence and whether it's worth $3.7 billion to invest in a structure that has proven to be very ineffective in its stated goals. I don't think the film goes beyond that to say that we should have total open borders or say anything to that effect.
Yes. Well, I doubt that any of us would advocate that it was money well spent, and so I don't think that's the point. I think you proved that very well and did it well, and there were parts that you showed the other side too. But still, I must say, it is unbelievable that we would give any consideration to totally opening our border to the problems that come in daily from this country. Thank you.
Well, that's why I think we need really comprehensive reform that deals with the complexities of the issues and not a Band-Aid of a fence that is largely ineffective. So I appreciate your comments.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I enjoyed the film very much. Do you foresee a time when the U.S. government can say, tear down that wall like we tore down the Berlin Wall? And if so, how soon?
I do, and I think it should start in this room tonight.
Okay.
A follow-up to that. When you had that wall torn down in Europe, there were how many countries there?
Are you asking me?
Sure.
How many countries were there when the wall?
Well, if we were to tear down the wall, are you suggesting Mexico and the United States become one country?
Oh no, I'm not suggesting that.
Okay, sorry, that was fault. The original question. Of all the mistakes or boondoggles that could have been made with this money, could there have been, what alternative possible worse boondoggles might have occurred, and what alternatives would have been possibly better than the fence? And as a bigger question, what does the fence represent as far as the U.S.'s ability to learn about foreign policy and how to deal with immigration policy and reform? Please.
Good question.
My first answer would be invading Iraq, but I know that's not relevant to this discussion. So go ahead.
I guess, so the first question is what other boondoggles could we have invested in?
Sure.
I mean,
for perspective, sure.
Well,
sure.
yeah, I would say that Iraq and Afghanistan would be two of the top ones, but I think, we need to think about what are better uses of that funding, right? And we laid out some suggestions in the film. Some were more comical than others, but I think there's a host of ways to spend $3.7 billion that's more effective to achieving the stated goals, if that's really the purpose. And I could go into some of the details. I think I've sort of detailed my position on immigration reform, and I think that the truth is that having more people on the border is much more effective than having a fence on the border. And I think that kind of the more thoughtful response right now seems to be trying to address the concerns on both sides of the aisle, where you can have immigration reform, a path to citizenship, and also an increase in the number of border security on the border.
Great. Rory, I'm going to amplify his question a little, and also the gentleman over here's question. I mean, what do? We turn on the TV, guys, and we see Juarez, all of these murders and all of this violence just over the border. And then people that live in that area are having people crossing over and garbage on their ranch and a fear that they have to have a gun or because somebody might come into their house, whether or not it's, people in Texas, just focus on this state, their land is their land, and now people are coming onto their territory. How do we, when we hear about the violence in Mexico, how do people here in Texas not feel that violence is going to spill over into Brownsville or Laredo?
Well, I think because of the Rio Grande River. No, I think that's a difficult question because there are, especially in Juarez, where there's really no separation and there's a lot of drug activity going on in El Paso too. It is a difficult question that has to be answered, but I don't think the answer lies in a physical solution. I think it's, and the reason, in my understanding of it, the reason that the violence is so bad now is because in 2006, the Mexican government decided to crack down on the biggest cartel leaders, leaving a huge vacuum, which has caused all this violence. So I think we have to consider the drug war as a whole, consider that even all the violence in the border has not added up to 1 year of drug overdose deaths in the U.S. I mean, I think there are a lot of complexities to the issue that I don't think are addressed by a simplistic solution. At the same time, I think it's a real issue for people living in Juarez, especially, and in that case, it's quite difficult, I'm sure.
One thing as an American historian, I noticed, it seems like we used to, the part that they do, I think, a brilliant job of showing is we used to build things well. The St. Lawrence Seaway and Hoover Dam and Interstate Highway, this is not a very well done public works project in any way you slice it, whether you're right or left, or it's not one of those proud American engineering achievements. It's like a bad LA freeway wall, we were down there when I went down with them, and we could walk and just hop over the fence, walk through parts where they had it. I mean, it's a very ill-conceived from simply an engineering point of view. Why don't we, there are two people here, we'll take both questions and we'll call it a night. Go ahead.
How did you go about your reporting, especially on the Mexican side of the border?
We sort of partnered with some Mexican journalists who had a better sense of how to navigate the political terrain of, policemen and town leaders and stuff like that, which made it easier. And the trip to Altar, Mexico was done as a sort of humanitarian trip that happens every year.
And finally, you get the last word on this end.
I grew up along the Mexican border on this side. But lately it seems I probably should start carrying my birth certificate because of all the hoopla of anchor babies, etc. And one of the things that I'm worried about is the hysteria of all these people coming over like an invasion. Yet through the years we've never had immigration reform, really good reform. And my thinking is that it's because we enjoy the cheap labor and we can exploit those people. And what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's beyond enjoying the cheap labor. I think our economy depends on it largely. And I think you're right that if you watch, certain outlets on television, I don't want to name anybody, but it rhymes with socks and it begins with an F. The representations are of criminals coming over into this country, terrorists coming over into this country, people who are just here to exploit this country, And it's simply not true. The vast majority of people who are coming here are hard workers. They're contributing to our economy. Mayor Bloomberg in New York just aligned himself with a number of other businessmen who are supporting the policies around creating paths to citizenship and opening up our borders, because they think this is the only way to get our economy back in order, is to bring people into this country, that we depend on them economically. And that's the type of representation that I think is unfortunately informing a lot of people's feelings in politics. And even with the drug war, it is largely contained in Mexico. You don't, there's pockets of violence, but it is not at the level that we're seeing in some of these news outlets, and certainly shouldn't determine policy in the way that I think it all too often has.
We're going to end. I just want to tell Keven and Rory just how proud we all are of them, no matter how this is a very difficult issue dealing with the United States and Mexico. They took on a piece of it with the fence. They put a lot of effort, work, in ingenuity, and encourage to make the documentary. And I think you both represent yourself and HBO very well. And a film like this can only be good for public understanding of the border and a debate point. And I thank you for coming tonight and asking questions. And let's all watch again when it airs on HBO in the coming week. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Doug.